Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. You might not remember because it was so long ago. No, not that long ago. Governor Bill Owens, good to see you again.
Back, how are you?
I'm doing great. We used to do this a lot.
We
when
did.
you were governor, and
We
I
did.
always appreciate it. Let me tell you that your successors have been a bit more sporadic coming on, but man, you would always come on. We would have fights on the show. We'd talk about things, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
It's good to be back. Enjoy it.
All right, so tell me, you miss it, don't you?
You know,
No, not this. You miss being governor. How can you not miss being governor?
You know, I really don't miss being governor. People don't believe me when I tell even my closest friends, but I think they know me well enough. I enjoy the privacy, enjoy making a little bit of money so that it's not week to week, month to month.
You got free housing when you were governor.
yes. But the salary I didn't do it for the money, and me and my successors and most of the men and women in public service do it for service. I loved it, but I actually surprised myself. I didn't miss it. As I walked out of the Capitol that day and went to a private sector opportunity, and next day was on a plane to New York, I realized, you know what? This is just a new part of my life.
You had that nice black Suburban that would drive you
That's
around.
right.
And the last day I saw you getting into your used Pinto, it was
Yes.
Let me ask you something, because you might be one of the last guys in Colorado politics, maybe nationally, who comes from a middle-class background, who can reach a position like being governor. I look at Jared Polis, even Walker Stapleton, who comes from some money, and I look at all the politics today. John Hickenlooper, when he ran for governor, he was set. I mean, it's just, it speaks to me of, one, your ability to do it, but I wonder if a guy today who started out when you were young and said, I want to make a change, I want to get into politics, and you got in there early, if they could still do it, given the campaign finance laws and given that it just seems like if you're not wealthy, you don't have the ability.
You know, I like to think so, that you can, and Bill Ritter wasn't wealthy and he followed me, and so there's at least a couple of exceptions to that rule. But it is getting tougher because of the campaign finance rules. They make it where a middle-class person, you know, can go out and ask other people for roughly $1,200, and that's it.
I mean, I think
if somebody self-funds with $1 million or $20 million, and I think Jared Polis has so far put $20 million into his governor's race, it makes it exceedingly hard to raise money at $1,000 a clip and compete with $20 million.
He told me, and I think the arithmetic's right. So Jared puts in $1 million check to his own campaign. Walker's got to go out and get 850 people to max out and say yes. So one guy's out on the campaign trail.
Right.
He's got the time, while the other guy's behind a phone begging for money. You know, I'm just curious. When you ran for governor the first time, what was your entire budget? Do you recall?
You know, I'd have to ask my friend and your fellow guest on this show frequently, Dick Wadhams, but I'll bet that campaign was $1 million, $1.5 million.
And I remember people were flabbergasted that it hit $1 million.
Yeah, we didn't do badly. We, with the help of Barb Card, we were raising money for that time pretty well, but today we have these limits. And instead of placing limits, what they ought to have is full transparency. If you take $100,000 from somebody, it ought to be widely publicized, and then the voters can choose. But in this case, with Jared Polis funding himself so far with $20 million, potentially in his entire career we're at $50 or $60 million, it's hard to compete with that.
It's incredible. But it's also just a testament of how it could have been done before. And I for the Bill Owenses of the future, I hope they don't give up.
Me too.
You know?
Me too.
Hey, talking about the past, I wanted to ask you something particular, because as you know, I'm running this initiative that I built largely on something you created back in 1999. When you ran, you said, elect me, we're going to widen I-25. Mm-hmm. And I remember so many people saying, can't widen I-25. Mm-hmm. Can't be done, won't be done, can't be done. So you were elected, and lo and behold, there's an extra lane on each direction in I-25 and 21 other projects around the state. And you bonded to do that. I'm trying to do something very similar with Proposition 109, Fix Our Damn Roads. And amazingly, your bond price back then, I remember it was $168 million a year. You adjusted for inflation, it's exactly what we're asking for here. So when people say it can't be done, first tell me the story. Who told you it couldn't be done back in 1999?
You know, a lot of people did. This idea actually came from when I was treasurer, and I was reading. There's a bond buyer daily newspaper for people in the bond business, and New Mexico was doing what became our trans bonds. New Mexico was #1 in the country, and I looked at New Mexico. A friend of mine was governor there, talked to him about it, and realized, you know, we could do that here. And at its simplest, we just set aside a small part of the annual budget of the Colorado Department of Transportation, and instead of spending it, we bonded it. So it's like buying a house and putting aside 10% of your current income to buy a $250,000 house that you otherwise couldn't afford. And it was financially conservative, and we did 26 projects around the state, including T-Rex, which was the largest private-public partnership of its time in the country. And it really worked, and the bureaucracy, and a lot of folks said, don't do it, you can't, and boy, we did it well, and this should be done well as well.
Well, what I keep hearing is that it's risky, that there's going to need to be massive cuts in order to make this happen. Of course, right now, we've got a $1.3 billion surplus, and because of the Donald Trump tax codes, it actually has a reverse effect here. The state's going to get a huge windfall.
It is.
So there's going to be $900 million a year coming in from that alone.
Right.
But I'm told, you know, it's still going to cause cuts. Did you hear the same thing?
Absolutely, we did.
You're going to cripple the budget.
I had just been elected, and I had been elected based on having studied this issue carefully. And even though some of our own friends in the bureaucracy said, oh, please don't, we can't run CDOT on 95% of last year's funding, I said, yeah, we're going to do that because it's the only way we're ever going to have the discipline to do these 26 badly needed projects. Otherwise, every year, the bureaucracy wants 100% of what it's getting. They don't want to set aside 5% of it like we do as homeowners, where to buy a home you mortgage in order to make a good investment, and you set aside, I don't get to spend all of my income because some of it goes to pay for my mortgage, which results in a nice house. The same thing is necessary for the state highways, and we haven't been doing that in recent years.
I gotta tell you, I don't feel comfortable with debt. I don't feel comfortable with this debt. I don't feel comfortable with any debt. And I wish that Colorado did things the way other states did, and the way things we used to do when you were governor with Senate Bill 1, which is you take an amount of money and you put it aside for road building.
You bet. We dedicated a portion of our general fund to roads.
Right, and that doesn't happen any longer.
It doesn't.
And so they took it away. So over the last decade, nothing has gone to roads. And I feel that we're in a position that the only way to jumpstart this is with bonding. And let me be very frank. I'm worried that the state legislature, if we don't bond for roads now, won't spend the money in the future. And this is a way to force the legislature to just take a third of this, actually a fourth of their surplus that's coming in that's predicted for the next 20 years, and put it towards roads and force them to do that. I don't know any other way to do it. Do you?
I don't, and I think the role of government, there's a couple of key responsibilities. The first is public safety, and the second is infrastructure. It's hard to have private sector roads all over the state of Colorado. So most of us would agree that you do need to have some public funding going into roads. And I am proud of the fact that Colorado has very little debt. In fact, we have a restriction on debt except upon a public vote. And we've used that very rarely. T-Rex allowed us to buy 26 projects at lower rates and lower costs than trying to do them sequentially year after year, stopping and starting and downsizing and adding. We did it all at once, and it worked really well. And that's why I really like Fix Your Damn Roads, or Fix Our Damn Roads, and why I support it. It's very similar to what's already worked in Colorado. But instead, some of our friends want to raise taxes for roads, and my approach has been, well, we haven't been funding roads out of this hugely expanding state budget. So given that, I support Jon Caldara in requiring us to fund them out of what we already have.
What also I have a bit of a memory issue here, so help me out.
I understand.
Yeah, right. When you were doing this, the Denver Post endorsed your plan that worked and gave us these projects. And I mean, I think where would we be today? I mean, as bad as it is, if we didn't do those 26 projects, and I mean, it would be terrible. The Denver Chamber of Commerce worked with you to get this done.
It did.
And
they were my huge allies,
right,
both
so
of them.
Both of them. And now both of those organizations are trying to say no to this idea, and let's do a sales tax increase affecting working families. You know, fortunately, in my point of view, the polling for their idea is at 30%. There's nothing there.
Right.
People understand that. But what changes?
You know, I don't know. It's a good question because the Denver Post, I worked closely with the Post and the News. Their editorial boards both supported me. The Denver Chamber was really right with us as we did this. And I don't know why these years later they're against it, except there's another increasing tax proposal on the ballot that for whatever reason those two organizations really like.
Well, and
what I
probably
would tell our
contractors
viewers,
as well.
Exactly. What I'd tell our viewers is that you know, whether you're for or against the tax one of these two, make sure you're for this one, because if that tax goes down and this doesn't pass, not sure what we'll do. This is the best opportunity to put a significant amount of money into expanding our state highways, and we desperately need it. We haven't been adding the lanes that we need.
Let's talk about something else, even before you were governor. And it's funny how these little changes to law, decades later, turn into these things or cause hideous problems. Let's see, it was 14 years ago, folks of Denver bought onto fast tracks, which was a horrific idea. And
I opposed it.
And the poor people in Longmont were promised a train that they haven't received. Now, mind you, they were promised the train with the original tax. They were promised with this tax, and now some folks at the chamber said, you know, if we pass this next sales tax, you might, maybe, perhaps, could even use some of this money to match a few other things, and then finally you'll get your train. And I'm thinking about why some of the trains are working now is because something that you and Senator Terry Considine, when the state senator, did, which was really unheard of, which was to say to RTD, you're going to contract out 20% of your service.
Right.
And how you got Roy Romer to do it is amazing, but the savings there is 40%.
Yeah.
And the savings is the reason why any of these tracks are now working, because they're now using those savings to finish that. Tell me the story.
And you were a major part of that as well as chairman of the RTD board. But basically, we realized that government-run buses weren't being run very efficiently. So Senator Considine, then and now one of my closest friends, and I introduced a bill that said to RTD, you're going to have to contract out to the private sector the operation of, you said 20, you might be correct. I know it later went to 50, maybe when I was governor.
When you were governor, you moved it from 20 to 50.
Because it was working so well, and we found that we saved 40% on these privately operated buses. They're still painted the same, it's still the same equipment, but they're run by people who aren't government employees.
I'll go a little farther. Same equipment, same uniform, same time schedule, same route.
People don't even know.
And it's on GPS, so it's looked at. And people think, and rightly so, that these people are paid less. That's partly, but it's the work rules.
And they're more efficient. Yeah, it's the work rules. We pay, in those days, we were paying people to come in and work for 3 hours in the morning, sit in the bus barn all day, and then work for 3 or 4 hours in the evening and paying them for 12 hours.
Did you know that the union contract for RTD requires a pool table in every facility for that lull time?
Yeah,
right,
so it's been a huge success, and to your point, we built the Southwest line with the savings from those contracted out buses. And then the one light rail line that I thought Colorado really needed was the one from downtown to the tech center. Wouldn't make money, but it was in fact and arguably a light rail line that from the largest business center in the state, which was downtown, out to the second largest, the tech center. We did that when it worked, and then our friends in RTD decided we're going to get greedy and go and run for a big tax increase. They did, and it's not been well run.
But you also did something else. And while I'll say that that line offers a contrast to the line that
That's
works.
a good way to put it.
And that contrast that works was the HOV carpool lane that went up north I-25 when you were governor, and you helped switch it.
We were the second in the country to do that.
switch it to an HOT lane,
Correct.
which allows us to use that lane and pay to get on it. And now it goes all the way up to Boulder. So RTD has buses that are the fastest in the country.
Put them in
but I can
those
go.
fast bus
Right.
lanes. Exactly. That's truly the answer to urban transit is high occupancy vehicle lanes that are tolled with buses. We're doing the same thing on 470 now. I tried to do it 12 years ago. The Douglas County Commissioners wouldn't let us do it, and now they're having to do it. A lot more expensive, but it's a great idea, and we were the second in the country to do it.
So let's switch gears. Since you've been out of office, how do you feel about being bookended by 24 years this way, 12 years this way, and hopefully not, but could be more? How is it that you were able to squeeze in there? I mean, this has always been a conservative-ish, libertarian-ish state, but we haven't had that many Republican governors. You're the only one that, in my lifetime, living here.
You know, it's a challenge because this state does elect Republicans. 4 of our 5 top elected officials today are Republican. The Senate's Republican, 1 of our 2 U.S. senators. We have majority of Republican congressmen. Sometimes the Democrats just run really good candidates. Sometimes our campaigns aren't as good as they should be. But
You mean the Republican firing squad, the circular firing squad?
yes, yes, our party turns on itself pretty quickly. Their party, meaning the Democratic Party, always unites. Sometimes our party doesn't. We may be, this guy isn't perfect on guns. This guy isn't perfect on this social issue. And then we vote against him. I had 2 candidates running against me from my right, and I'm a strong Reagan conservative. They got 4% of the vote, almost cost me the election. You would have had Gail Shetler for 8 years because instead of 41 tax cuts and I think some other good things we were able to do.
I'll tell you a couple of good things you were able to do that got switched. One, the competitive contracting. You did something, and I say this now because I never thought I'd be in this situation. I've got a son with Down syndrome, and so it took 5 years on a waiting list to get my son onto Medicaid to get services.
Right.
And now anybody who's fully abled and
Right.
can go on and get it like that. You did something called a consumer-directed health care, and said for people who are on Medicaid, instead of getting your services through the bureaucracy, we'll give you cash. And whatever you save, we'll split with you. And
Right.
you can save that money in your own account. Your successor ended that program, but I knew so many people who benefited from being able to have more in services and, more importantly, more control. Instead of getting a home health care aide that the agency sends down, they could hire somebody they trusted. They could pay them more on holidays, not to leave them alone. One woman I knew got sent to bed on Christmas night at 7 p.m. because the home health care aide wanted to go. And she spent the evening laying in bed because that's the way it was. When she got your program, she was able to hire somebody she trusted, pay them more on a holiday, and live a better life. And I think about that on the services my son could get.
You know, so often it's a question of people like me and you believe the individual can make the best choices for themselves, whether it's in education, where we always fought for charter schools, for more choice, for empowering the student and the parent rather than the teachers union, but it's also in Medicaid, where the choice should be up to the individual. You, on behalf of your son, is going to make much better choices than is the government, and yet the government bureaucracy always wants that power back, so as soon as I left, they grabbed it.
Talk to me a little bit about how Colorado has changed. The demographics have changed, and I feel that we are on a one-way track to turning Colorado into California. I'm seeing it in, I've always thought that Colorado character was this craving for freedom to make your own decisions, and that people were drawn to this state to write their own biographies. You see it with artists, you see it with manufacturers, you see it with entrepreneurs, you see it with ranchers and miners. And more I see that Colorado is turning into a state where people want to make decisions for others. You can't use a plastic bag. You can't buy a sugary drink. You will buy this product. You won't build on your property.
You won't drive cars on certain streets. We're going to
take away this lane, and bikes can be on there.
Right.
And even this year with a proposal to say you can't get the oil and gas out of your own property.
Right.
I mean, I'm worried about where the state is going, and that we will become California East. Tell me what you think.
I am too. I'm an optimist. I've always trusted Coloradans, but I do see some trend lines that are disturbing. Colorado needs to understand that our taxes, which have been historically appropriate but also appropriately low, we won't compete successfully by increasing them as some of these ballot initiatives do. Crime rate is going up dramatically in Colorado. Last 5 years, violent crime in Colorado up 25%. Murder rate in Denver, first 6 months of this year, up 58%. So we better
to what do you attribute
we
that?
better back our cops. We better appoint tough judges. We better appoint a tough parole board. We better stop worrying about whether some sheriff has been unkind to a prisoner and start realizing that these men and women are protecting us from some pretty violent people.
Do you really think that it's the Black Lives Matter movement? I'll go ahead and say it. And this war against cops, that's causing them not to be able to.
I think that's had a huge impact in terms of not on a racial basis, but I just think that the respect for law enforcement has been diminished. And I've ridden with these police officers. I rode with Denver's police in District 6 on the Friday after Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Extremely, 2 armed robberies in the same quadrant at the same time. We need to back the police, and they make mistakes. They should be held accountable, but we also need to understand that there's a thin blue line protecting us from people that want to take from us what is ours, including our life and liberty.
We've only got about 4 minutes left, but let's go with that for a second. That idea of taking what is ours, that's
pretty
not
endemic. It's not just from the criminals.
Yeah, it's not just from the criminals.
Right.
It's also by the criminals that we elect.
Right.
That
want to. I won't.
I won't go
with
that far. All right. That there's more and more. You say that we're a relatively low state. When you add in our local tax burden,
right,
we are 22nd in the nation.
Correct, and that's
so
why
we are not a low tax state.
Right.
We're right there in the middle of the pack.
And you're right. At the state level, we're relatively low, but that's because we've always believed that taxation is best at the local level where it's most easily controlled. So we're high local, low state, right in the middle total, to your point.
All right, let's get back to this idea of a change. I think there are a lot of people who have come to Colorado because the housing is cheaper than where they left, which is unbelievable in my mind.
Right.
It's a nice place, the city is fun, but I don't know if they sign on to that Colorado character, that bit of individualism, that bit of risk-taking, that bit of I will direct my life, you direct yours, and we'll work together voluntarily. I'm feeling that's going, and I wonder what should we do to get it back? Or what if you agree, and two, if there's something strategic to do?
I don't want to become California. I don't want to become Oregon. I don't want to become the state of Washington. That's fine for them, but we're different. This is a state that's always believed in the individual, always believed in welcoming the challenge of entrepreneurship. And I am concerned that some of the folks on the other side want to take that from us, and it's up ultimately in a democracy, in a republic, for the citizens to decide. And so it really is up to the citizens. Hopefully they get engaged on what is happening, often behind their backs to them while they're not looking.
There is a harshness to the progressivism that's going on now. And I'm going to see if I can do this right. You took over for Roy Romer.
Right.
Both you and he and Dick Lamb, those were different Democrats. And I remember the fights you had with your predecessor.
Right.
They were fun to watch and tough to do.
But they were always as gentlemen.
They were. But also there was a difference that I don't think Roy Romer could ever be elected through a Democratic primary in Colorado today.
Right.
That type of guy who had respect for agriculture, respect for property rights, he wouldn't do it. The Democrats were different then. Maybe the Republicans have changed as well, I don't know. But I can tell you that when you were going through the legislature, your opponents were different as well.
They were. It wasn't, we had moderate Democrats then. And really, with a few exceptions, it's hard to find them today. Well, a lot of the focus of the press is on the Republican Party and the hardness of our right. And again, I'm a conservative Republican. We haven't noticed how far hard left the Democratic Party has become. They don't allow their legislators or their elected officials to move on charter schools, to have any sort of taxpayer sentiment. And it's going to cost us a lot if the Democratic Party itself doesn't reform.
It was Roy Romer who helped create the first charter school
Absolutely,
law
he
in
did
the country.
And I sponsored it.
Right. And today, Democrats are trying to destroy charter schools which serve 140,000 kids in our state.
We had strong Democratic support. Maybe a third of the Democrats supported charter schools. Today it would be hard-pressed to find a tenth of them who do, even though this is the most important thing you can do for public education is to get more parental involvement through reforms like charter schools.
20 seconds. Any predictions for the election?
Going to be some winners, going to be some losers.
Now you sound like a sports.
Walker Stapleton would make a great governor of Colorado.
Do you think he's going to win?
Don't know. Too close to call.
So good to do this. Always fun. Always grabbing a beer with you is a good time too.
We'll do it.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.